more. All right, Dr. Emerson, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. So it's my distinct pleasure and honor today to be introducing our speaker. And here's some information and background about her. So, like I said, I'm excited to introduce her. And so just to give you top 5 about our presenter today, Dr. Gachupin is a chronic disease epidemiologist and an associate professor in the Department of Family and Community Medicine in the College of Medicine at the University of Arizona. And she received her doctorate from the University of New Mexico and her master's of public health in epidemiology from the University of Washington. And so I'm introducing her as Auntie because on my mother's side, we have the same tribal affiliation, which is the Pueblo of Jemez in New Mexico. So we share that tribal affiliation. So I'm extra honored to be able to introduce her today. And she's also involved with the University of Arizona Cancer Center, the Partnership for American Indian Cancer Prevention. And so she is a principal investigator on a number of NIH-funded grants, included an R01 that's focused on obesity-related chronic disease prevention and healthy lifestyle promotion among Native youth. And she, most importantly, I think, models how working with tribal communities to inform community programming and advance research with American Indian tribes. And so I think it's a distinct pleasure to have her, and seeing her commitment to improving the lives of the health of American Indians is really remarkable. So having said that, I will turn it over to before I turn it over, here is our first poll everywhere question. And so the question is, the goal of the Partnership for American Indian Cancer Prevention is to alleviate the unequal burden of cancer among American Indians in the Southwest through research, training, and community outreach programs. Let's see if I'm doing slides here, and we have our disclosures. And yeah, so we're seeing some of the live responses coming in. I'll leave the slide up just for a second or two longer. So thank you everyone for being in attendance today. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Gachupin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you for asking me to be part of your series. What I'd like to go over today is really how we form partnership with Native Americans. And one of the most important things that we need to recognize is that when we do partnerships, we're also recognizing what has been accomplished from our partners' perspective and with whatever it is that they bring to the table. And so a lot of my presentation today will actually be kind of giving you background on some of the work that has been done from a Native community perspective, and then ending with some of my own research. And so the first question, or the next question, I guess, our polling question is, how many tribes are there in North Carolina? And so we're getting responses in real time. And we'll give it just a couple more seconds. And 56% of you said there are 8, 33% there are 12, 11% said there are 3. And it turns out that there are 8. And so in starting out my presentation, I'd like to make sure that we acknowledge the Native peoples whose lands the university sits on, as well as many of you. And so we want to acknowledge all the experiences and all the contributions that they've made. So because I am from the University of Arizona, it also sits on the homelands of the Yaqui and the Agam tribes. And so I want to make sure that we acknowledge our communities that our university is located on as well. And so again, I would really like to showcase different cancer efforts that have happened in Indian country. And Indian country is a collective of all the tribal communities in the United States. And a lot of those efforts have actually been supported by the Indian Health Service, which is the agency that is tasked to provide healthcare for Native peoples, and also in partnership with the National Institutes of Health, as well as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And then to really talk about cancer health disparities, in that, yes, we are making strides in the right direction, but a lot more needs to happen. And so really talking about what our future priorities might look like. And then finishing off again with things that we need to keep in mind about how to work best with tribal communities. So in starting off, this is a picture of the United States, and the darker color shows where the Native people are located. And this is really important to recognize, because even though we show where most of the reservation Native people are located, is we know that 70% of Native peoples actually reside in urban areas. And even so, they go back and forth. They'll live maybe part of the time in the city, and then they'll go home for ceremonies, traditions, or different things that may be going on. And so it's a very fluid community. And we need to keep that in mind when we're talking about cancer, because individuals may be needing to go to a cancer center for their care, and it may be quite a ways from their home community and for sure their support systems. And so we need to kind of keep that in mind as we're thinking about things like treatment and diagnosis. One of the first things that I want to talk about is tribal-based epidemiology centers. In the 60s and 70s, there was a national movement by many tribes known as tribal self-determination, where federal programs that were typically run or traditionally run by the federal government started to be assumed by tribes. And this included things like their social services systems, their housing programs, their education programs, and their health programs. And by taking over their own health programs, they were interested in taking over their own clinics, their own hospitals. And so tribes started to do this through mechanisms known as contracting and compacting. And when they did this, they quickly realized that they needed accurate data and timely data to make decisions about things like resource allocation, funding allocation, how to do recruitment and retention for providers, for example. And so the tribes requested tribal epicenters that they be established so that these entities could actually help them with a lot of the statistical and kind of projected kinds of projections, kinds of things that the tribes were recognizing that they needed. So in 1994, the very first epicenters were started. There were 4 of them. And actually one of the areas that was first to be funded was the Southeast. And so through these epicenters, a lot of strides have been made in the area of cancer, because these epicenters really focus on what the tribes deem to be high priority. And for many of them, cancer ranked in the top 3 for sure. And so the work that epicenters have done included things like classifying racial misclassification. We know that as Native people, we may be born Native, but we may die a different race, because a lot of times the person who fills out the death certificate may not ask the family about race, and then they may put a race other than Native. And so there is misclassification that happens, and that has huge implications for denominators that might be used for estimating rates. And so a lot of work that epicenters have done is trying to understand how much racial misclassification happens in cancer registries, for example. Some of this sentinel work was done by the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board, where they found that there was about 70% differences in the rates that were published versus when they did a linkage between registries and Indian Health Service records, because to receive services with the Indian Health Service, you have to be a card carrying from a federally recognized tribe. And so you are Native. And so when they did that matching, they found that there was huge discrepancies in the incidence rates that were being reported. Other thing, and here's a citation, one that's fairly recent. This work has been ongoing, and it's the misclassification work. A lot of it started in the Pacific Northwest, but it has expanded to really also include areas across the United States. And in this graphic, the different colors represent the administrative areas within the Indian Health Service. And I mentioned earlier that there were 4 epicenters that first started, but now we're very fortunate that we have an epicenter in every single area that is colored here on the map. And so this is a citation, again, as I mentioned, that describes the levels of misclassification, but also the methods that were used, which I think are really important for us to learn from. Through the work of the epicenters, there have been collaborations with local state cancer registries where tribal specific reports have been published. And these are 2 graphics of the Navajo Nation that have done 2 separate reports to look at cancer among the Navajo Nation. And the first one was from 94 to 2004, and a more recent one was 2005 to 2013. But this really allows the regions to be able to provide tribe-specific information. A lot of other cancer surveillance work that's been done has been in Alaska, where Alaska recently published a whole compendium of 45 years of worth of cancer data, a publication they just released recently that spanned from 1969 to 2013. So the citation I'm putting here for you. But these are very helpful because they give a more granular look at what kinds of cancers are being reported, what kinds of treatment. And some of these reports also look at things like screening, for example, which is really important in terms of prevention efforts. And so epicenters have contributed this. Other things that the epicenters have done is they've done cancer cluster analysis. A lot of tribes are very concerned about the environmental exposures and its relationship and association with cancer incidents. And so epicenters have done these cancer cluster analyses. Through funding from CDC, several comprehensive cancer control programs have been started. And it was actually advocacy from the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board that actually allowed the funding mechanism itself to be expanded to include tribes. And in 1998, this is when the PAR was actually increased. Before that, the comp cancer programs were only available to states. And so now through this mechanism, we're able to do that. And I've actually had the privilege to be part of several epicenters. I started my career at Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board, and then I started the one in the Northern Plains, and was actually the first to write an application that was funded for a comp cancer program in the Northern Plains. The epicenters have been very important in providing primary care doctor and navigator trainings, and actually starting these different services and programs within the different regions, and then also doing work in primary prevention. And then in the graphic that I put on this particular slide, this is just a chronology of the epicenters and when they were started, where they're located, and some of the work that they're doing. And so for the Southeast, if you've not ever introduced yourself to your epicenter, I would encourage you to do so because, again, they're doing some really important work. So aside from the epicenters, there is another mechanism that has, I think, been very beneficial to our work in cancer control. And these are a funding mechanism that were started between the Indian Health Service and the National Institutes of Health. And this particular funding mechanism is called the NARCH program. It's the Native American Research Centers for Health. And this is a competitive grant call that funds projects. It's kind of like a center grant. And through this center grant, there are actually mechanisms that allow research projects to be funded at an R1 level, at an R21 level. There's a place where you can do training, and the training can be for faculty, it can be for community, it can be for undergraduate students, postdocs. There's a mechanism that allows capacity building. And so through the NARCH program, there was in Northwest Portland Area Health Board again, there was a Tribal Researchers Cancer Control Fellowship program that started and still is operational today. And this is a really great program for anybody who is being introduced to the field of cancer control, because it allows you to learn a lot about what I just have been describing in terms of cancer control incidents. It spans the whole continuum of cancer care, and it establishes a network that fellows can be a part of even way back past the training program itself. There is a summer research training program as well that has been happening every year, every summer, and people can go to learn about how to do focus groups, how to set up surveys, how to learn how to navigate the IRB, for example. And so far, there have been over 1,000 people who have gone through that training program. Some of the NARCHs have specific training programs for grad students, and for one of the NARCHs, they've trained 196 students. Again, through the NARCH program, there have been projects that have been able to focus on environmental exposures, which I mentioned are really high priority areas for tribal communities. And then also doing things like risk behaviors and just exposures that might be contributing to risk for cancer. Things like tobacco cessation, projects that have been specific to H. pylori or HPV that are related to cancer. And I had mentioned earlier that there is a mechanism in the NARCH for capacity building. And through that, many tribes have been able to establish their own research review committees that are IRBs. And so, again, this has been very instrumental in moving us forward in the whole field. Here is a picture of NIH and then a screenshot of the NARCH program itself. There is, I believe, the calls for NARCH are not regular. They come out when there is available funding. And so if you are interested in this mechanism, I would just encourage you to just check the NARCH website for releases of the PAR. The other mechanism that I think has been very helpful to moving the needle forward is another mechanism called the IRENA. It's the Intervention Research to Improve Native American Health, and this is a different grant mechanism. And one of the things I should mention about NARCH that makes it very unique is that the funding actually goes to the tribe. The tribe is the one who receives the grant, and then they set up sub-awards with investigators that they may be working with to deliver the specific aims of the grant. For the IRENA, this does go to university faculty or researchers who may be doing research in partnership with tribal communities, but a lot of the concepts that I mentioned for NARCH are also part of the IRENA, and these are research grants available at the R1 and the R21 level. And through this, both the NARCH and the IRENA have formed listservs so that all the investigative teams come together on a regular basis. They share progress about their projects. things that they can really learn from each other. So it's kind of formed their own network systems that I think are very good in providing support and answering questions, because a lot of the project officers and the program directors from NIH attend those meetings, and they're able to answer any questions that researchers or tribal communities may have. As part of the IRENA, there was something called the Promoting Indigenous Research Leadership Program, which brings together researchers that are working on a grant application. And they are teamed with mentors who can help them to come up with very competitive, specific aims. They'll review your grant proposal for you. They'll help you to network and get you in touch with people who may be instrumental in helping you to get your project together. And so here are a couple of snapshots of cohorts that have gone through Pearl. And there's actually a call for application for the new Pearl cohort. And that is going to be held in the fall, and it's going to be in Phoenix, hosted by Arizona State University. And then through the IRENA, there's been a lot of projects that have focused on health promotion and primary prevention, which again are key for things like cancer and other chronic diseases. So those are things that have been going on in Indian country to, again, kind of move the needle forward, because tribes recognize the importance of us focusing on cancer. One of the projects that I'm involved with is called the Apache Program, and it's funded through the National Cancer Institute. And this is a center grant. It's a U54 mechanism. And on this map are pictures of the different Apache programs. And in Arizona, you see two little bubbles there. And that's that's the Apache program that I'm involved with, which is called our NACP program, the Partnership for Native American Cancer Prevention. And through that grant, it's actually been funded since 2002. I've been the contact MPI since this current funding cycle that we're in. And this is a program that is a center grant as well. And so it does have different pillars that we work through. We fund pilot projects as well as full projects, kind of at like the R21 and R01 levels. And so far, we've been very fortunate to have funded 33 throughout our duration. We have 58 investigators that we have worked with or currently work with, and 9 of which are Native peoples. And for the first time in the history of the NACP program, both MPIs are Native. Myself leading the program at University of Arizona, and Jenny Ingram leading it at Northern Arizona University. And through our program, we bring in students as well for training. We do a lot of bench assignments. So we partner students with researchers. We're doing a lot of the basic science work. And we keep track of students as they go through. And we're very fortunate to have seen so many students get their bachelor's degree, their master's degree, and their doctoral degrees. And over the span of the NACP life, we've been able to see increases in each of these levels. We also sponsor a webinar series that showcases different efforts of the different programs that I just mentioned, people who are leading the different individual projects, and I'll be going over that a little bit more. We also do dissemination training, how to work with tribal communities. We have podcasts. And then here's a QR code to some of the podcasts that we've been able to produce. And then on the next slide, I just show that we also work with the tribal communities, primarily in Arizona. We have advisory committees that help us to make sure that we're including all tribal priorities. We have a special training program that's focused on early stage investigators. And we try to involve students in all facets of our projects. And in the bottom left-hand corner, you see the number of students that are working with us in the different research projects that we have. Currently, we are funding 4 pilot projects, one focused on cervical cancer, another on H. pylori, one on liver cancer, and one on breast and cervical cancer. And so this is very typical that we'll fund between 4 to 5 different research teams in any given. We usually fund projects for between 2 to 3 years. And so these projects on the screen are funded for 2 years, and they're now in their first year, actually. And then this next slide, I don't know why it's going slow. I mentioned that we need to keep in mind that even though we have all these different efforts underway that I think are very highly successful, we still have a ways to go because cancer still is plaguing Native peoples quite a bit. And before I go into some of the cancer incidence rates, I do want to remind everyone about some of the context for Native people. There are 574 federally recognized tribes, and each of them needs to be recognized on their own. There are about 5.2 million who self-identify as Native peoples. We do have a lower life expectancy, and this declined by 6.5 years due to COVID. We do have disproportionate disease burden. We have high levels of socioeconomic status variables that impact us, that include education, poverty, just economic adversities that we experience. And then we do have higher mortality rates compared to the United States, all races for many different conditions. And some of those are listed in this graphic that I show here. And we do have higher potential life loss because of our high rates of suicides and homicides as well. And so here is the next slide is another poll for us. And if you could tell us which cancers you think are higher for American Indians, and then you have 3 choices: breast, prostate, colorectal, kidney, ovarian, stomach, uterine, gallbladder, liver, or lung and bronchus, liver, myeloma. We'll give everyone a few seconds to complete that. Okay, so we have kidney, ovary, stomach, uterine, gallbladder, and liver being ranked the highest. So let's see. So on this next slide, the previous slide was just overall, and this slide that I'm showing you is specific to Arizona. And so this is a paper that we published a while back, and it just really looks at age-adjusted incidence rates for cancers from 2004 to 2013. And even though it's kind of small to see, the blue is American Indians. And where I'm showing the little star are cancers that are higher for Native peoples in Arizona. And it's important to know that even for those cancers that are lower in incidence rates, the 5-year cancer survival rate still is not as good as for all races. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. I want to show this graphic. I showed this earlier to you of where most of the Native people are, which is on the left side. And the right-hand side is where the cancer centers are. These are the NCI designated cancer centers. And if you kind of just move back and forth, you can see that the cancer centers do not coincide with where the Native people are. And so it's really issues of access to some of these resources that are available. And again, it just really shows where the cancer centers are. It doesn't mean that there aren't any cancer centers. It's just that they're not the NCI designated ones, which NCI designated cancer centers are provided with resources to be doing research alongside treatment care and to really be kind of the cutting edge in terms of the different therapies that are available. And so if you go to a cancer center that is not necessarily NCI designated, it means that that cancer center may not have access or even resources enough to be able to access what the other cancer centers have. For Native peoples, we're very fortunate that we have 2 cancer centers now in Indian country. The first one was the Salish Cancer Center that was established up in the Pacific Northwest. and we have one on Navajo at Tuba City. We have had three Native oncologists. James Hampton died in the fall of 2022. We currently have Judith Cower, who's at Mayo in Florida, and Jennifer Erdrich, who actually is at the University of Arizona, who is Turtle Mountain Chippewa. And so clearly we need more Native people trained and working to address our cancer needs, and more centers that are more centrally located. I've been very fortunate to have been working with a team led by Dr. Ken Batai that includes Dr. Cipollini and Dr. Lee. And over the past few years, we've been looking at one of the cancers that came up on the slide as being higher for Native peoples, and that's kidney cancer. And through our research, we've been able to validate that indeed there are discrepancies in the types of renal cancers that we see among Native people. And this actually extends to the Hispanic population as well. And even the time that it takes to be scheduled for a surgery is longer. The stage at which it's diagnosed and the mortality rates are higher for Native people. And the type of treatment once surgeries are scheduled are quite different for Native people versus other races. And so we do see that, and there's no reason not to think that that doesn't apply to other cancers as well. And so really important for us to understand that. One of the things I did want to talk about a little bit is clinical trials, because in the past, especially because of the pandemic, there's been a huge push to involve Native peoples in clinical trials. And it's really important that when we do talk about inclusion, that we have things that we consider first and foremost. And one of them is that we think about clinical trials not just from recruiting somebody for a research project perspective, but really making sure that individuals who that person is part of, that is networked with, including tribal communities, is that what is involved with a clinical trial be explained, that there be more community engagement for recruiting individuals to clinical trials. And this includes providers, because a lot of times providers who may be part of a primary care system is going to be doing a referral to the cancer center, but there's not ongoing communication between the two service providers. And so I think that needs to be really established a little bit better. And I mentioned earlier that many communities now have research review committees. And so really working with the review committees so that they understand what clinical trials are and what the requirements are. And by virtue of design, many clinical trials are double-blind randomized studies. And many tribes do not appreciate that there will be a control arm. They feel that if there is a treatment available, it should be made available to all, and that it being withheld is considered to be unethical. It's really important to explain the difference between research versus treatment, that there not be issues where people feel that it's going to be for treatment purposes, when really it's the effectiveness and safety, the efficacy of the drug is what is being tested, and that be made very clear to both potential participants as well as to the community that may be thinking that this is for treatment purposes. And when we think about healthcare for Native people, we're talking about many different types of healthcare systems. And so just having individuals who are leading clinical trials be aware of where that person is being referred from is going to be really important. And thinking about the continuity of care for that individual, because multiple systems are going to be involved. And then just really thinking about the burden of the trial to the individual. And I showed you a map earlier that many reservations are rural. And so just thinking about the distance and the scheduling and the additional burden to the treatment regimen that will be added by virtue of the trial itself. And really having investigators and funders invest in the long-term care, because and I hope this is coming through in my communications today, is that we really want to set up long-term partnerships, that these are not just things that we do and then we just kind of let go and don't really follow up on. These have to be long-term relationships that we're trying to build, just making sure that even the consent process is something that is more user-friendly. Right now, many of the clinical trial consent forms are like 30 or 40 pages. They're very technical. And so even that can be hard to understand. And so making sure that those are available in lay language. Biospecimens is a huge issue with Native communities because there has been research in the past that has collected biospecimens that were not adhered to like they should have been. They were used for secondary purposes without approval or even without knowledge of the tribal communities. And so things like storage of the data, secondary uses, destruction, all of those need to be very well sought out and discussed with the participants and the communities before those are kind of just assumed that they're going to work for everybody that's involved. Right now, we're very fortunate that there is a tribally owned biobank that exists, the Native Biodata Consortium. And so here I put a web link as well as a logo that they have. And this is in the Northern Plains, actually. And so it's something that we're moving forward in making sure that research doesn't just happen to us, but that we are providing alternative resources to tribal communities that respects their tribal sovereignty as well as the needs and the wants that they may have regarding research projects. We need to think about privacy and that most Native people think about health in a holistic manner, that it's not just the physical illness that they're talking about, but also the spiritual, psychological, and all social kinds of things that come in when we're talking about healing and health. And then really, this is actually from the cancer center's actual words, is that they would really like access to chemotherapy medications that's not contingent on participation in a clinical trial. So making sure that those resources are being made available. So that was specific to clinical trials. And then on this next slide, I want for just to spend a few minutes talking about what we need to think about when we're working with tribal communities. And with President Biden, all of us probably have our own views of his presidency. But one of the things that I think is really phenomenal and important for us to recognize is that 6 days into his presidency, he signed an executive order recognizing the nation-to-nation relationship that the federal government has with tribal communities. And this is really important because very few presidents historically have done any recognition. Obama and Carter are other examples of presidents that have recognized tribal sovereignty and really respected it. So I think this was great that he did that. And he also held that the federal agencies that were under him really did adhere to making sure that there was tribal consultation policies that they were following. Some of the things that we need to keep in mind when we work with tribal communities is that there really has been trauma that has resulted from research that's been done badly when working with tribal communities. And that we need to keep in mind that when we work with tribal communities, that protections need to extend beyond the participant. That really does include family and community considerations, that tribes being sovereign nations is that they have the right to own the data that's coming from their community people, that we need to assess harms and benefits from the Native perspective, and that it not be right now our federal regulations are thinking about the individual and individual autonomy. But when we work with tribal communities, we really need to think about the collective, and that there is this huge diversity when we think about the individual tribes and what their needs and what their wants might be, and that this extends to urban communities as well. And so it is more complicated, and we need to make sure that we have due process when we're working with tribal communities to make sure that we're addressing all the research specifications from their perspectives as well. And we're very fortunate that at UNC, we have the American Indian Center that can provide guidance to anybody who's going to be working with tribes in your area or region And if it extends beyond that, they would be able to help you as well. And so I would really encourage anybody and everybody who's interested in doing this work to consult with your American Indian Center. And in Arizona, we also have a similar service, and it's called the NEPTAL. It's the Native American Technical Assistance Office. And what they've done is they've actually, for the 22 tribes that are in Arizona, they've actually created a link so that any of the tribal communities, we can link on them, and they will take us to a website that has their research policies, their latest requirements for when you're working with a tribe, that particular tribe, what you need to be doing. And so these are available to individuals to make sure that you utilize anything that might help you to do additional just background homework so that you're prepared when you're working with tribal communities. I mentioned earlier that we do a seminar series that showcases different initiatives in Indian country. And here I'm just going to show you everybody that has participated in our series. And these are very, I think, people who have been movers and shakers in dealing with cancer in Indian country. And we do have recordings of all these sessions. So if you're interested to hear what any of these individuals shared, you're more than welcome to go to the link, and I will share that with you in just a little bit. So the first one with Jennifer Erdrich, who's one of the oncologists that I mentioned earlier. Then Alaska, I told you, has a long-running cancer surveillance system. Linda Byrne-Stepanoff is a one-woman show. Oh my gosh, she's done everything in cancer control you can think of. And so she's a font of experience, expertise, always willing to help. We showcase work of students, and here is Kristen Natoni, who did work in HPV cervical cancer, sharing her work as a master's student. The Native Foundation, American Indian Cancer Foundation, is doing incredible work. And so I would encourage anybody in the East to make sure that you touch base with them. Another area that's working specifically with urban cancer data is the Urban Indian Health Institute. We were able to get them to share some of their initiatives with us. And on and on. The Roswell Park Cancer Center is doing phenomenal work in setting up cancer-specific programming. We heard from Jackie Slow-Talker, who has a daughter who was diagnosed with leukemia. So she spoke about pediatric cancers. We have from Cherokee Nation, who has been running their own registry for almost a decade now. We heard from Sohail Khan, who is the director of that program. Again, really important people that I would encourage you to take some time to learn about the different programs and services that they're running. We heard from Salish, who was the very first cancer center, as I mentioned. Herschel Clark talked about risk behaviors regarding tobacco. We heard from the American Cancer Society, from the Cancer Lifeline, was our most recent speaker. And here's the web link and the QR code to go to any of those resources that I'm mentioning. We also produce education materials, and here are just pictures of a flyer that's on how to conduct research with tribal communities, American Indian cancer statistics. We also produce guidelines for researchers, anybody who wants to work with tribes. A lot of what I'm talking about today are provided in an actual checklist format. We can actually send you hard copies of these, or you can download them, whatever that works best for you. And then here is our last part of my talk and the last poll, I believe. And here is a question on what areas you think need to be prioritized when we're dealing with cancer with Native people. So I'll let you go ahead and start that. So some of the things coming through: cultural competencies, addressing barriers to diagnosis, treatment, clinical trials, access, and actually access has come up quite a bit here. Okay, and consents that are clear and precise. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. So these are things that have been brought up by our advisory committee, as well as a meeting that was held. And there was a national cancer conference that was held here in Tucson about in the fall, November 1st and 2nd. And so some of these are from that meeting as well. And so things that have come up are childhood cancer care and support, men's cancer prevention and control, survivorship issues, environmental exposures, just again, continuing to make sure that we have data that we can rely on that's accurate and valid, especially regarding incidence, mortality, survival, thinking about comorbidities, because oftentimes it's not just cancer. It may also be diabetes. It may be hypertension. It may be cardiovascular disease. And polypharmacy is that your individuals are taking medications for all the different diagnoses. The behavioral risk factors, including mental health, social determinants of health, are really important. And then training, making sure that we're training more people to be navigators, nurses, radiation therapists, pharmacists, physicians, especially oncologists, researchers. We need more epidemiologists, for example. And then just examples of programs that have been long running that have really established successful research and outreach. And these include programs like Walking Forward in South Dakota, the Partnership for Native American Cancer Prevention, which I mentioned to all of you, the Spirit of Eagles, the Native American Cancer Initiatives program that Linda Burns-Stipanoff runs, the comprehensive cancer control programs that are existent in the Northern Plains as well as the Pacific Northwest. So these are just examples of programs that you can tap in so that you don't have to recreate the wheel. And all of them are more than happy to help. One of the programs that I really do want to bring to people's attention is the summer internship for Indigenous peoples in genomics. It's the STEAM program. I am faculty to this, and actually this year it's going to be hosted in Arizona at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff and Diné College. And this is a program that really does get at kind of genetics. It explains the science of it. And because cancer is a genetic disease, the more that you can understand the different social implications of it is really important. It's really based now. A lot of projects now do GWAS. They do the whole genome sequencing. And so it generates a lot of data. And so it's important to understand the bioinformatics of all that data and the implications of it. And so through the SEAM program, we go over a lot of the actual technical aspects of it. We actually give everybody a wet lab experience where you actually do a cheek swab and you're able to do your own DNA analysis. You do your own electrophoresis, your own PCR. And so we do have this annually. It's funded by the National Science Foundation. And so every year we have it in the summer. And so if there's the link, if you are interested in actually in future SEAM programs, I encourage you to apply. It's a really great program. The other thing that I want to bring to your attention is that I am guest editor to a special issue of Cancer Health Disparities and Public Health. And if you have a manuscript in the works and are thinking of where should I submit this to, here is a QR code to this special opportunity. We would welcome your submission. You still have to go through the whole peer review process, but I'm hoping that we can include papers that are specific to Native peoples. We did run a special issues a couple years ago, and these are some of the articles that came through that. And we were able to publish 19 articles, and over half of them were specific to Native people. So I'm hoping that we can repeat more of the same. So again, if you're thinking about publishing a paper, and then I just want to acknowledge there have been a lot of people involved in the initiatives that I just mentioned. William Freeman and Leo Nolan, Cliff Boudre, for example, were the spearheaders behind the NARCH program. I want to acknowledge our oncologist, Judith Coward, Dr. Burdridge, and Dr. Hampton. A lot of people within the CDC and the Indian Health Service have been instrumental in the the epicenter programs, for example, the misclassification that I mentioned. These are individuals like David Espy, Nat Cobb, Chuck Wiggins, Charles Key. Here at the University of Arizona, Dave Alberts is the one who got the initial NACP program. I mentioned the long-standing surveillance projects that have been held in Alaska, for example. Those were in Navajo Nation. Those were led by Ellen Provost, for example, Darnell Peake. Dorothy Rose is at the Oklahoma Cancer Center. Dr. Jenny Joe has been instrumental in a lot of the training programs alongside the NIH collaborators, including Sheila Caldwell. Melissa Jim's been instrumental in this classification work, and on and on. It's just taken a whole village for us to be where we're at today. And so these are some of the people, again, who've been contributing to all the initiatives. And here are some of the references that I cited on a single page for you if you want to take a screenshot or something like that here, so you can look at what has been done. And then again, if you have any questions on anything that I mentioned today, I think these are going to be made available to you, the slides. Here's my contact information, and I am done. So we do have a few minutes for questions if anybody has a question.
Wow, just incredible. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Gachupin. And so on this next slide, I think we'll open it up to any questions. And so we have about 8 minutes for that. But just the Zoom era virtual round of applause. Yeah, just thank you so much. That was incredible. Thank you for all the information that you shared with us today.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any questions?
We are still waiting for questions, and we do have time, so hopefully we'll have some that will be shared, and I'll post any that we receive.
And I'm not very good at manipulating multiple screens, so I don't know if anything came in on chat. Can somebody check that to make sure there are no questions there?
While we're waiting for questions, we do have someone who said, "Thank you so much for this tremendous talk. I learned a lot today and really appreciate your taking the time to share all of the wonderful work you and your team are doing." And that was from Dr. Wheeler, who's one of the co-organizers of SciCep, along with Dr. Bell and the other organizers. So we'll see if we've got any other questions coming in. I didn't see any. Let's see. We did have a comment that this is an incredible set of resources, and so we're going to coordinate with the others in SciCep to see if we can post some of these on the SciCep site. And we do have a question that just came in.
So how do you identify Native students for your internship and training opportunities? And this is a couple ways. One is students might self-identify and say, do you have any opportunities? But we also have a formal application process. So we'll make the opportunities available and known widely. We do collaborate with a lot of other university-based programs, and so we will all be like on a list that students can access so they can see all the different kinds of summer programs or training programs, internships. Through our advisory committees, a lot of them also sit on like, for example, they may be part of the College of Public Health, and so they offer like listings to all their students of opportunities. And so we have targeted advertisement that we do. We have social media sites that we advertise all our opportunities on. We produce a monthly newsletter where we'll post all the available programs, and so that goes out pretty widely. So we try to use as many mechanisms as possible to get the word out, to let students know that these opportunities are available. We do let students know that they can be part of our programs through their internship or preceptorship requirements. We also, again, a lot of students self-identify. We have the research programs that we fund. So a lot of those investigators will do their own networking to get students to work with them on a specific project as well. So there's many different levels of training that's made available, and we just try to get the word out as best that we can. And then the link to the resources mentioned requires a username and password. Is that correct? No, you should be able to just use the QR code or the links that I provided, and it should take you right to the website. There should not be a layer of access that is required, or shouldn't be. Okay, and since there are no further questions, Mark, I think unless you have a last statement to make, I think we're fine to adjourn.
Yes, thank you so much again. I think just also a thank you to our collaborators and sponsors, and a special thank you to Tim and his team, and John and Andrew for making this a smooth process today. So the telemarketing team, or sorry, the telehealth team. And then also just an announcement, mark your calendars, November 1st for our next upcoming webinar, which should be really good. So this will be Dr. Tammy Greer, who is the director for the Center of American Indian Research Studies in Louisiana. And so she does a lot of disparities work there among the American Indian community in Mississippi and Louisiana. And a lot of her research explores culturally adapted programs to improve lifestyle factors among tribal nations. So I think that'll be really interesting to hear from her. So again, mark your calendars for our next webinar in the fall. And until then, you can take a look at our past webinars on these resources here. And more generally as well, just a shout out to our website. So go ahead and bookmark that. And, I hope we'll be able to include the wealth of resources that was shared today. And so this is always kind of, non-static, always adding to this website. So bookmark that as a resource. And again, just, thank you for attending and joining us today. And again, just thank you again, Dr. Gachupin, for sharing all the information with us. And it was really nice to hear. And so, thank you, everybody.